Greetings, everyone. It is the Ambassador coming at you with a brand new video today, and I want to take a few minutes and everything because I actually sat down last week and binged, in a good way, The Mandalorian. And this might be a couple of videos that I will do because there's several things I want to talk about in terms of The Mandalorian and what have you. But today I just wanted to give a real quick reaction video and everything to what I thought of Season 1 of The Mandalorian. And I will say I have heard a lot of reviews and everything over the last couple of months and everything. And I will be candid. I was kind of on the fence. Is this going to be any good? But you don't know until you take a look at it for yourself. And I will say, overall, I did enjoy The Mandalorian. I thought there was a lot of good parts to it. I honestly thought that it was entertaining. I did get an idea of what they were going for in terms of themes and dynamics within the series. I will say the main character himself, the Mandalorian, I am bought into him. I do think he is an interesting character. I look forward to see what they do with him in the next hopefully in the next couple of seasons, however long the show runs. But my initial thoughts on the Mandalorian himself, and I'll kind of break down. I'll break down Season 1 here and everything over the next few minutes. The sense I got of the Mandalorian is this guy is a very no-nonsense, very gritty type of character. He does have some complexity to his character because he is not one note. And I think that's one of the good things about this series and everything, in particular this first season. You get the idea that the Mandalorian is not a one-beat character. I will say, in comparison, although I do like Boba Fett, he is kind of a one-note character. That doesn't necessarily make him a bad character. It's just there's not a whole lot of complexity to him. But what I think of the Mandalorian, the character himself, and for those of you who have not seen the series, spoiler warnings, because I will be spoiling some plot points here in this video. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. You have been warned. Click off now. Okay. I will say this about the Mandalorian. I think there's potential for his character. I think what they set up initially in this first season has places to go. He does have room to grow as a character. There is a lot of different threads that they can pull on and explore with this character. Because while he is, as I mentioned, he is very no-nonsense, he is very gritty, he does have both for lack of a better term, a compassionate side. He also has a moral side. While he is a bounty hunter, he does have a moral code, which I think honestly makes him much more of a compelling character. Now, I'm not saying that the other bounty hunters within the Star Wars universe were devoid of a moral compass, but you get this idea of the Mandalorian that while he has been adopted into the Mandalorian culture, he has his own background that he grew up in that he has kind of incorporated into his identity as a member of the Mandalorian tribe. Now, that all being said, in terms of how the Mandalorians are portrayed in this particular show, I will say I am not disappointed. I do like the evolution that they have gone with in terms of the Mandalorian people, because you do get some explanation sprinkled throughout these 8 episodes that the Mandalorian race, as was known within I would say the Clone Wars TV show and the Rebels TV show, you get allusions to the fact that the majority of the Mandalorians were wiped out by the Empire. And honestly, this is unfortunate. But what they have done with the Mandalorians is they have taken the morality and the cultural spirit of the Mandalorian people, and they have compacted it down into a creed, a lifestyle, a way of behaving, and a means of identifying oneself. Because what we see on screen, from what I can understand, the majority of these men and women who are in the Mandalorian armor are not necessarily true Mandalorians, except for maybe the armorer character, the female armorer character. She might be a full-blooded Mandalorian. And they've actually done, what they've done with the Mandalorians is something that was done actually with the Sith. Because this goes back into the EU, the Expanded Universe material. And I've kind of talked about this off and on. Within the Expanded Universe, you have the fallen Jedi come across the Sith race on their homeworld of Korriban. And the Sith were a red-skinned alien race that these exiled Jedis kind of took lordship over and eventually interbred with. But eventually, the Sith people, either they died out or they migrated back to their home world, or whatever the case may be, or they might have migrated to another world. But the term Sith became synonymous with those that align themselves with the dark side of the Force rather than the light side of it. And what they've done with the Mandalorians is kind of along in that same vein of what happened to the Sith. The word or the term Sith became synonymous with, as I mentioned, Jedi that align themselves with the dark side of the Force. And that's why Darth Vader, Darth Sidious, and all the other Dark Lords were referred to as Dark Lords of the Sith. Because that was actually a callback to a title for the leadership of the ancient Sith race and everything when the exiled Jedi took control of the Sith culture and intermingled with it. And what you have here with the Mandalorians is their core ideals, their culture has survived by being passed on to what they term as foundlings. Because the Mandalorian himself was what they call a foundling. He was not he was not born Mandalorian, but he was brought into the culture. He was raised in it. He was trained to be trained in the same method that other Mandalorian warriors were trained, and he took on the mindset and the cultural identity of the Mandalorians because he was raised by the Mandalorian race. And all these other Mandalorians that you see throughout season 1, they are most likely either they were natural born Mandalorians, or they were the term they use is foundlings. And I honestly really appreciate that idea because it kind of ties into my own background and everything. As I might have mentioned in another video, I am actually adopted. And I was adopted by another family, a family that wasn't of my same blood. And you get this idea that the Mandalorians have not okay. They have found these children. Um, in the last episode of season one, we actually get a good chunk of the backstory on the Mandalorian. He was on a home world, on a different world, and everything. And you get the impression that this took place during the Clone Wars because you see droid gunships, you see the super battle droids and everything in the background. They're attacking a city or a planet or whatever. And then you see the Mandalorians come in and rescue a good chunk of the pop, or at least some of the population of that town or wherever they're at. And what ends up happening is the Mandalorian is adopted into the Mandalorian culture. He is what they call a foundling. He wasn't born Mandalorian, but he's brought into the culture. And I honestly thought and everything that was a really nice touch because that's something I can identify with personally because I was born into one family, but it was another family that brought me in, that called me their son, and so on. And I honestly thought that was a very nice touch because it makes the Mandalorian much more relatable. Yes, he does. His profession is as a bounty hunter, which does have a certain code of conduct, has a certain morality to it. You don't go after targets and anything that aren't up for capture. And throughout the series, he interacts with several different characters. You have the Ugnaught Cooley. You have the bounty hunter droid IG-11. You have him interact with Cara Dune, with Carl Weathers' character Greef Karga, and several other different characters. But how he interacts with them more often than not is on a very even-handed, very amicable level. Although the Mandalorian does have a very, I think, understandable prejudice against droids, considering it was droids that attacked his home world and murdered his parents. So I can understand why he has a prejudice against working with droids or interacting with droids on any level. But what you end up have happening at the end of the season in episode 8, you have that same bounty hunter droid IG-11 that the Mandalorian encounters with and ends up incapacitating at the end of episode 1. That same droid is found by Cooley and reprogrammed as a nurse droid, as a guardian for the I know everybody calls it Baby Yoda. I don't like that. It's an okay term. If you like that term, that's fine. But often it's just referred to in the subtitles as the child, so I'm just going to refer to it as the child. The IG-11 unit is reprogrammed as a nursemaid / guardian of the child. And what ends up happening is that the IG-11 droid self-sacrifices itself to save the rest of the group because they're in a very bad way. And while you don't see it visually on the Mandalorian's face, he's trying to convince the droid that there is some other way that they can get out of the situation. And the IG-11 unit is like, no, logically there is no other way. The only way for us to get out of this mess is for me to sacrifice myself, and he does. And you have that moment with the Mandalorian, with Cara Dune, and with Greef Karga, where they're all like, is there some other way that we can get out of this? And they're like, and the IG-11 unit is like, no, there isn't. And I thought that was honestly a very nice character moment between the Mandalorian and IG-11. Now, I know a lot of people have had their complaints about The Mandalorian, that the tone of it is kind of all over the place. But for me, at least, I enjoyed the tone and tenor of the show. It had some lighthearted moments, in particular with the child and what have you. And there were some organically fitting comedic moments or funny moments within season 1 that I honestly enjoyed. I did enjoy the art style and everything, the set design and everything. I know a lot of people have complained, well, they're all pretty much on desert worlds. Well, Not entirely. There are a couple episodes where they are not on a desert world or what have you. I, but honestly, for me, I think they'll eventually get away from less desert, arid worlds, and we'll probably see a variety of different worlds and everything in future seasons. At least I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that they do go that direction. I will say, overall, I thought the direction, the storytelling, the writing was all very good and everything. Because a lot of people, I think, have been overly harsh about this show. And while I understand their position, and I'm not throwing shade at anybody, you're entitled to your opinion. I think when you've got a first season of the show, they're trying to get their footing. They're trying to figure out what direction they're going to go in this show. And I will even compare this with season 1 of Babylon 5, or maybe even season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation. Because both those seasons were not pitch perfect. There were some weaker episodes. I know that both those seasons were longer in terms of episode count, but at the same time, there were some episodes that were kind of lagging. They didn't keep in tone with what other episodes had done. But for me, at least, I think they kept the tone pretty much consistent throughout the 8 episodes. I did not watch episode 6 because a lot of people had said that it was kind of a dragger, it was kind of a downer. But I watched all the other episodes of season 1, and I was certainly entertained. Now, I had to do it over a couple of days because I had other things to do and what have you. But I was by no means bored at any point or anything when I was watching season 1 of The Mandalorian. And I will say, for Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni and Deborah Chow and Taika Waititi, I know that guy gets some shade thrown at him and everything for some of the things that he says and does and whatever. And all the other directors and everything who worked on this season, you have my respect. Y'all did a good job. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. And I hope that you all will listen to the better parts of your nature and you will not kowtow to this idea of trying to use future seasons of The Mandalorian to try and fix the errors of the sequel trilogy. Keep The Mandalorian the way it is, or at least improve upon it and tell your own story. The sequel trilogy's dead. Let it die. It's done. Just don't do it. Because you've got potential with this show. But anyway, getting back on track and everything, I want to wrap this up. I enjoyed the music. I thought the music honestly was very good. I thought the score for all 7 episodes that I did watch, by most likely all 8 episodes, was fairly original. It had kind of a Western feel, which I think was deliberate and what have you. But it still had enough similarity to what we've heard in previous Star Wars shows and movies that kept to the themes or anything that had been established. And I thoroughly enjoyed the music. It didn't bother me. But I know there's a lot more to talk about with The Mandalorian because I do want to discuss some of the relationships a little bit further in depth, anything in particular with Cara Dune, with Greef Karga. I do want to touch upon the villain we get at the end of, or in season, or in episode 8 with Moff Gideon. I do want to give my thoughts on that. So we might leave that for another video. But overall, I just want to say initially, I did enjoy The Mandalorian. For those of you who have not watched it, I do recommend it. And as they say in the show, this is the way. Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, Deborah Chow, Bryce Dallas Howard, Taika Waititi, all of you, this is the way. keep it up and improve. And don't use The Mandalorian to try and fix JJ's and KK's and RJ's mistakes. Do your story, not what Kennedy wants you to do. Do your story. There's room to go up from here. But that being said, as I mentioned, there will be other videos I will do or anything, because there are other parts of The Mandalorian I do want to touch upon. I do want to talk about the child. I do want to talk about the yodeling. I like that. We'll talk either the child or the yodeling. I want to dedicate a video to him, because honestly, there's a lot there to talk about. I will say very briefly, because as I mentioned, I want to wrap this up. I will say very briefly, I think there's potential for the relationship between the Mandalorian and the child, or the yodeling, and I'm interested to see what they do with it. And I will say one thing about the yodeling: he is not entirely what he appears, and that's not a bad thing. So until next time, my friends, this is the Ambassador, signing off.